You've got three main types. You've got your 10 nanometer and smaller. Those are your super advanced ones. Those are used in most AI programs. So that would include things like satellites. That would include things like AI, I'm sorry, self-driving.
Mm.
At the bottom, you've got your 90 nanometers and bigger. And these are almost analog chips. They can only do like one or two things. So like the chip that's in your smart bulbs would be one of those. And then in the middle, 90 to 10, everything else, that's the vast bulk of the market. And that's everything from aerospace to automotive to power regulation. And if a single country falls out of that constellation, none of it works
Wow.
because there is no backup for any of it.
Okay.
So if we do have a war in Taiwan that is meaningful in any way, we lose the good chips. And that means AI goes into a winter for at least a decade. The 90 and bigger, the dumb
Yeah.
chips, those are almost exclusively China.
Okay.
So when China goes, no matter how China goes, we lose the Internet of Things and everything that comes from that.
Huh.
Everything in the middle is actually significantly more durable. The chips aren't as advanced. Their production comes from different places. There's some in Europe, there's some in Japan, there's some in South Korea, there's a lot in the United States. In fact, by value, the United States by value, the United States produces more chips than the rest of the world put together. Those were that
Okay.
10
By
nanometer
value.
and higher, those are really expensive chips, but there's just not a lot of them.
Mm.
And the 90 nanometer and below, there's a lot of them, but they're just not very expensive. So everything in the middle for your cars, for your planes, and so on, we're probably okay with a China meltdown or even a Taiwanese capture or destruction.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's immune to all the shocks that are going on out there. There's a lot, especially with the Ukraine war, I'm concerned about.
Mm.
But we're not really worried about the infrastructure or the industrial plant. And, you know, in this world, that's about as good as the news gets. We're going to be really good. I mean, we're pretty good now. We're already the world's largest economy, highest standard of living, energy secure, food secure, blah, 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 blah. 10 years from now, once we've built out the industrial plant to replace a lot of these places like China that are falling away, we're also going to have lower costs of production and more secure production and higher employment. And the employment here will be fueling the factories that are selling the products to the people who are consuming here and will be broadly immune to international shocks. This is a good story.
Yeah.
But the path from here to there, yeah, there are a lot of bumps and it is not great. Sure. So let's deal with it first from the strategic point of view, and then we can deal with it from the economic point of view. So one of the things that the Europeans refuse to admit is after the American Civil War with Reconstruction, while the United States was kind of off by its own, it was digesting a continent. And over the course of Reconstruction and knitting the country back together and conquering the West, we became not just the largest economy in the world. We were that before the Civil War. We became a larger economy than the British Empire, the French Empire, and the German Empire combined.
Mm.
And so when World War II came around, if you're willing to step back and ignore the emotion and just look at the numbers, there was no way that the war was going to win in any way other than American domination. And so once we got to 1944 and it was clear that the Soviets had broken the back of the Germans in the East and that the Normandy and the Italian invasions were going to be successful, everyone realized it was time to prepare for what's next. And for most of the Europeans, they thought what's next was going to be an American empire that occupied Western Europe. And they were in the process of making their peace with that because they realized they didn't have much of an option. Because if you were like Dane or Dutch, you were in exile. And so the deals that you cut when the Americans invited you to discuss the post-war system were going to determine the nature of your occupation. And in the opening speech, the United States made it very clear that was not what was up. We were going to create a fundamentally different system with the goal of making global war unthinkable. So in the world before World War II, it was imperial. Everyone had their own navy. Everyone patrolled their own supply lines. Everybody guarded them jealously, and everybody fought over the supply lines and the market access and the colonies. The American vision for the post-war environment would be that the U.S., which had a huge navy at that time, would patrol the global oceans for everyone so that anyone could go anywhere at any time and access any commodity and trade with any partner. And the real kicker was that the Americans would open their market first. because there wasn't a European market in the aftermath of the war. All you had to do was let us write your security policies, because we saw the world differently. It wasn't about economics for us. It was about security. We saw the Stalin-esque Soviet war machine rampaging through the East. We were getting reports from our intelligence that what the Soviets were doing in Ukraine and eventually in Poland was worse than what the Nazis had done in many ways, which was, mind-boggling. And we realized that there was no way that we, operating from a different continent, could fight that unless we had literally millions of bodies between us and the Red Army. And since the Europeans were coming out of the most destructive war in human history, they were in no position to do anything unless they could be properly incentivized. So the whole idea of globalization from the American point of view was to give the entire world an economic reason to stand up to Stalin. And it worked, because it used to be, well, globalization meant you didn't need all four. You just needed one. And you could trade for the others under American protection. And that literally created the world that we knew. From the American point of view, we think of this as containment, and it was. From the rest of the world's point of view, it was everyone getting on the road to civilization more or less at the same time. From different starting points, going at different speeds, but for the first time in history, we were all industrializing. And that changed everything. And that creates the environment that we're in today. They were invited, but when it became clear that it wasn't about Stalinist central control, their delegation broke down and left fairly shortly thereafter. A lot of the what we consider the Central European countries were there and did sign, but then they became Soviet bloc satellites and obviously didn't participate in the deals that happened on the backside. Think about the time difference between now and then. So, we are roughly 80 years from World War II now, roughly 70 years from the Korean War. Think about what was 70 and 80 years before World War II. You had all of the Franco-German wars. You had the rise of Imperial Germany. And so people knew in their bones that when a large country captured another country, it was theirs.
Yeah.
And this went a very different direction. The Brits came in with a plan for taking over the world again that the Americans were going to pay for.
Oh, no kidding.
So everyone had their preconceived notions. The Brits were just, wacko on that point. But, everyone's parents are a little odd when they get older.
Interesting.
But for everybody else, the question was, what are the American terms going to be? Because, why would they bring us to a off-season ski resort in the middle of nowhere if it wasn't just to grind into us just how little? One of the things with the Ukraine war now is we're discovering, and everyone discovered this in World War II and in World War I and in every war the Russians